On that humid evening in June, when the Louisiana swamps breathed their poisonous vapors into the air, and the Spanish moss hung like shrouds from the cypress trees surrounding Magnolia Grove Plantation, 18-year-old Rebecca Sinclair stood on the veranda of the big house and made a decision that would damn 3 souls to a hell on earth, for she had chosen 30-year-old Daniel, the blacksmith's apprentice, to be the vessel of her awakening desires she had been taught to suppress, but which burned inside her like a fever that no tonic could cure. And if this story grips your heart, leave your like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, because what you're about to hear reveals the hidden depravity that festered beneath the genteel surface of the Old South's most aristocratic families. Rebecca was the youngest daughter of Colonel Edmund Sinclair, one of the wealthiest sugar plantation owners in Louisiana, master of 2,000 acres and 200 enslaved souls who worked the cane fields from dawn until long after darkness fell, their lives measured in the amount of sugar they could produce before their bodies gave out from exhaustion and disease. Rebecca had been raised like a hothouse flower, sheltered from every harsh reality, educated in embroidery and French and pianoforte, taught to be an ornament that would one day grace some wealthy man's parlor, and she had accepted this fate with the resignation common to daughters of her class, until the summer she turned 18 and something awakened inside her, something dark and hungry that her governess's strictures and her mother's careful supervision could not contain. Daniel had come to Magnolia Grove 2 years earlier, purchased from a plantation in Mississippi where he had learned the blacksmith's trade, and he was a man of exceptional beauty, tall and powerful with arms made strong from years of working the forge, his face bearing the marks of his African heritage with pride despite the chains he wore. And Rebecca had noticed him from the first day, noticed the way he moved, the way firelight from the forge cast shadows across his features, the way his voice carried across the yard when he sang old songs in a language she did not understand, but which stirred something primal inside her. For months she watched him from the safety of the big house, inventing excuses to walk past the smithy, asking her father's permission to have Daniel repair various items from the house so she could observe him working. And Daniel knew what was happening, knew the dangerous game being played, knew that a young white woman of Rebecca's class looking at him with those hungry eyes could only end in disaster for him. But he was powerless to prevent what was coming, as powerless as a man standing before an oncoming flood. It began innocently enough, or so Rebecca told herself in the moments before sleep when conscience tried to speak. She would ask Daniel questions about his work, about how he shaped iron, about where he learned his craft, and he would answer with the careful deference required of an enslaved man speaking to his master's daughter, never looking directly at her, always maintaining the proper distance. But Rebecca wanted more than conversation, wanted more than the chaste interactions that propriety demanded. She wanted to possess him, to own him not just legally as her father did, but in ways that went far deeper and far darker. Who heard this story could not remain indifferent, just as you should not remain indifferent. If this story touched you, leave your like so it won't be forgotten, because what happened next reveals the true horror of a system that gave absolute power to some and absolute vulnerability to others. One night in July, when her parents had gone to New Orleans for a week to attend social functions, and Rebecca was left under the nominal supervision of her aged aunt, who retired early each evening, Rebecca sent word through the house servant Martha that Daniel should come to the big house after midnight to repair a door hinge that was supposedly broken, and Daniel came because he had no choice, came with dread heavy in his chest, because he knew there was no broken hinge, knew that this summons was for something else entirely, something that could cost him his life if anyone discovered. When he entered through the back door of the big house and climbed the servants' stairs to the second floor, where Rebecca waited, she was standing in her bedroom, wearing a white nightgown, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders, and the moonlight streaming through the window gave her an ethereal quality, like a ghost or an angel. And she spoke to him in a voice that brooked no refusal. "Daniel, I know you understand why I called you here, and I know this is forbidden, but I don't care about rules or propriety. I want you. And you belong to my father, which means you belong to me. And you will do what I say, or I will tell everyone you forced yourself on me, and they will hang you from the nearest oak tree. So, you have no choice in this matter. You will satisfy me, or you will die. Those are your only options." Daniel stood there frozen, his mind racing through impossible choices. Knowing that if he touched her he was damned, but if he refused he was dead, and so he made the only choice available to a man with no choices. He did what she commanded, and in doing so, he surrendered not just his body, but something deeper. Some essential part of himself that could never be recovered. Some core of dignity that was violated more profoundly than any whip could ever violate flesh. Rebecca felt triumphant in that moment, felt the intoxicating rush of absolute power, of having bent a man to her will, of having taken something that society said she should not want, but which she desired with a hunger that consumed all reason. And she made Daniel return to her night after night, always with the same threat hanging over him, always with the knowledge that one word from her could end his life. And he came each time like a man walking to his own execution, his spirit dying a little more with each visit, until he was merely a shell, a thing without will or hope. The pattern continued for 3 months, Rebecca's appetite growing rather than being satisfied, her demands becoming more elaborate, more degrading. And Daniel endured because survival was the only option left to him. But the other enslaved people on the plantation began to notice his deterioration. The way his eyes had gone dead, the way he moved like an old man though he was still in his prime, and they whispered among themselves about what might be happening, though no one dared speak openly about suspicions that could get them killed. It was Josiah, Daniel's closest friend among the enslaved workers, who finally confronted him one evening after Daniel returned from the big house looking more haunted than usual. And Daniel broke down and told his friend everything. The midnight summons, the threats, the degradation, the feeling that he was losing himself piece by piece. And Josiah held him and wept, because he understood that there was no escape, that Daniel was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no waking. The discovery came not through any enslaved person's testimony, but through Rebecca's own carelessness. She had become so confident in her power, so certain that her privilege would protect her, that she grew sloppy, and one night her aunt, unable to sleep, heard noises from Rebecca's room and opened the door to find her niece and Daniel together, and the old woman's screams woke the entire household, brought the overseer and the other white employees running, and Daniel knew in that moment that his life was over, that no explanation would save him, that he would be blamed entirely regardless of the truth. The consequences came swiftly and brutally. They dragged Daniel from Rebecca's room and chained him in the barn. And the next morning when Colonel Sinclair returned from New Orleans, having been summoned by urgent message, he ordered an immediate investigation. But the investigation was a mockery. No one asked Daniel his side of the story. No one questioned whether an enslaved man could possibly refuse a white woman's demands. The conclusion was foregone. Daniel had committed the ultimate crime. He had defiled a white woman of aristocratic birth, and the punishment was equally predetermined. They hanged Daniel from an oak tree on the edge of the plantation before sunset that same day, made all the enslaved workers watch as a lesson, as a reminder of what happened to those who stepped out of their place, and Rebecca was forced to watch too, forced by her father to witness the consequences of her actions. And as Daniel's body swung from that tree, his eyes found hers in the crowd, and in those eyes was not hatred but something worse, something like pity, like forgiveness. And that look would haunt Rebecca for the rest of her life more than any nightmare or any guilty conscience. Rebecca's family sent her away immediately after the hanging, married her off within a month to a 50-year-old widower in Texas who had no knowledge of the scandal, a man who owned a ranch far from Louisiana society. And Rebecca went to her new home like a prisoner going to jail, went knowing she would never be free of the memory of Daniel's eyes. of the knowledge that she had destroyed an innocent man to satisfy her own selfish desires, that she had used the system of slavery to commit a crime for which she would never be held accountable by any earthly court, but which would torment her soul until the day she died. She lived another 40 years in that Texas ranch, bore 6 children to her elderly husband, watched them grow and marry and have children of their own. But she never spoke of Louisiana, never spoke of Magnolia Grove, never spoke of Daniel, though she thought of him every single day, thought of him every time she saw enslaved workers in the fields, thought of him every time she heard someone justify slavery as a benevolent institution, thought of him and knew in her bones that she was complicit in a system of such profound evil that no rationalization could ever make it right. When Rebecca died at age 58, they said it was consumption that took her, but those who were with her in her final hours whispered that she died calling out a name, calling for forgiveness from someone named Daniel, calling into a void that gave no answer, and they buried her in a cemetery on that Texas ranch. But her soul found no peace in that grave, no rest from the guilt that had consumed her life like a cancer eating away at healthy flesh. The story of Daniel disappeared into the silence that surrounds so many atrocities of the slavery era. His name never recorded in any official document, his life and death reduced to a footnote in Rebecca's private hell, but somewhere in the soil of Louisiana, near that oak tree where justice was perverted into murder, his spirit remains, a witness to the countless others who suffered similar fates, who were used and discarded and destroyed by a system that gave absolute power to some and no protection whatsoever to others. And if this story made your heart beat faster, go now to the channel and subscribe to discover the other voices that time tried to silence, because we must remember these stories, must honor the memory of people like Daniel, who suffered not because of any crime they committed, but because they were trapped in a system that treated them as less than human. And we must never forget that power without accountability breeds the kind of evil that destroyed Daniel and countless others like him, and that only by remembering, only by bearing witness to these forgotten tragedies, can we hope to build a world where such horrors can never happen again, where every human being is treated with the dignity and respect that should be every person's birthright, regardless of their race, their station, or the circumstances of their birth.